And the last method we're going to talk about is quoting. So this is probably the method with which you're most familiar. A quote is directly taken from the original source, word for word. Everything is the same. It's usually a very small section of the original work. Sometimes you might take a couple sentences, maybe up to a paragraph, but if you find yourself wanting to take a lot of information and directly quoting it, you should really ask yourself, could I paraphrase this in a different way? Or maybe if just the general idea is what you need, ask yourself, could I summarize this more effectively? You really only want to quote when how something is said is equally as significant as what was said. For example, in the Martin Luther King Jr. speech, I had a dream. The way that he said that, the fact that he had that particular sentence structure, that phrase itself is very famous. So quoting that, I would get the meaning and how it was said. I would get all those things in one. If I were to try and paraphrase I had a dream into I had an experience while I was sleeping or an image while I was sleeping, that's obviously not capturing what he said. That's really not what he meant. And the fact that I'm paraphrasing there is really taking away from what it is that I wanted to use from that. So when you're quoting is really used best when you want to maintain how something was said. Quoting also provides a certain credibility to what you're saying if you're using information from a credible source. If you say, the President of the United States said XYZ, that's a lot more impressive and holds a lot more credibility than something that your roommate Bob said. And a lot more authority. So if you use something from an authoritative source and you include that in your paper, you can kind of temporarily borrow that authority for whatever it is that you're saying, adding some credibility to your writing. So how would we quote? Well, we copy the words exactly. If you want to omit a small part of the sentence, that's fine. You would simply replace the few words with 3 dots. If you're taking a larger piece, maybe 3 sentences in the middle sentence you really don't need, you could replace that with 4 dots. If you add a word for clarity, for example, if your original source says she said or he said or they did this or this idea, again, referring back to old information, and you're not taking that as new information, and you want to clarify that for your reader, you can often replace it with brackets and add the clarifying statement within brackets. So that's something that you can do, but ideally you want to copy the writer's words exactly. And in terms of documentation, again, this is going to require you to look at your citation style that you're using and inquire what sorts of what information you need to include in citations. But a quote will always require quotation marks around the quote to indicate that this is quoted material. You will need to provide the speaker or the author's first and last name, their position of authority if they have one, where the information was originally published, if that is significant, that's important. And for some citation styles, the page number is required for a direct quote. And a direct quote is, again, something that you're directly taking from the original work. So that's something that you want to pay attention to with regard to the citation style that you're using. So this summary, the original is Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead. This is an example of maybe a book synopsis or a summary that you're giving of a book that you read. Like we talked about the movie review a little earlier, you really just want to give the main idea, right? That's what we talked about. A summary is just giving the main idea, the broad overview. So the original book, The Fountainhead, is approximately 750 pages. I wrote this here to really highlight the fact that a summary will be significantly shorter than the original work. The summary of this here, I'm not gonna read it, but you can see here that this summary is really just touching on the main points of the book. I'm really trying to just highlight the main plot points. What is the book about in 3 or 4 sentences? Here it is. I'm not giving you exactly who the main characters are. Those would be some of the bigger supporting details. I'm not talking about each of the individual chapters, each of the individual paragraphs. I'm just focusing on the main idea, the broader meaning of the book. So this is an example of a summary, significantly shorter than the original work, still makes reference to the original work, has a kind of a citation, and doesn't include any of the minor or the major details even, just really tries to give a broad overview. An example of a paraphrase, you can see probably immediately the difference from a summary in that the paraphrase really is comparable in length to the original work. Here, the reason I would paraphrase is maybe I want to use all of this information from the original work, but if I were to just quote this, I might as well point the reader to the original work and say, hey, read this instead. And the other thing is with this original work, there are other ways in which I could phrase the same stuff. I still get the same meaning, the same topic, the same news I can still say, but I can use different phrasing and different words to put it into my own words and make it my own. If you notice at the end of the paraphrase, there is an in-text citation that will direct my reader to the original work if they choose to go and search that out, which is correct. Also, you'll notice because this is an online news article, I don't have page numbers to cite, but I have directed my reader to para.3-4, which means this came from the third and the fourth paragraphs of the news article. So this is something in APA style that you can look out for, is if you take something from a specific paragraph, that will be in place of your page numbers in APA style for anything that you find online. So that's something to remember. But again, here with paraphrase, I can use synonyms, I can use different sentence structures. All of these tools can help me rephrase the same information while still maintaining the main idea and getting that across in my writing. And the last example we'll look at is of a quotation. The original work is also from a different online news article, and the quotation, you can see I've taken the entire part. Now, whether I need to include all of this is probably a question for another lesson, but I probably could have paraphrased a lot of this, but I did want to show you what a quotation would look like. So I start off according to a New York Times article, and then I give the information in quotation marks, followed by an in-text citation, pointing my reader to the original source, again using the paragraph citation because it is an online article. But notice I didn't use any of my own words. This really is a direct quote, word for word it is the same. If I wanted to take out a couple of words, I could use the 3 dots. If I wanted to take out a full sentence, I could use the 4 dots, but because I only have 2 sentences here, that probably wouldn't work here. Using the 4 periods to replace a sentence is more appropriate for 3 sentences or more, but that's also a tool that's available for you. So the important thing to remember here with a quotation is that it is exactly the same. I've not taken words out, and if I would show where they've been taken out. So now that you're familiar with the 3 methods of source integration, summary, paraphrase, and quotation, how do you know when to do what? So we've given you 3 methods that you can choose. Do you pick randomly? Do you just say, it's a sunny day, so I'm going to paraphrase today? That's not how it works. There is actually a sense and a reason to picking one method over the other. So if you want, open up the decision tree flowchart linked on the course website to follow along. So this is the decision tree flowchart that's linked on the course website, and this will provide you with specific instructions that you can follow step by step. If you're the kind of person that likes specific instructions for how to do something, you might use this the first couple of times that we work with summary, paraphrase, and quotation in your writing assignments. So the first thing you'll do is skim the entire text for a general overview. Generally, what's the text about? So you can get a broad idea if you can use it. When you're looking for sources to use in a research paper, you're not going to read every single article entirely because that would take forever. And you probably need to come up with a number of different sources. So the first thing you do is skim, is try and get the main idea just from a first glance really quickly. So based on your understanding of the original work, based on this skimming, do you think that the main idea seems relevant to your point? This is step 2. Step 2, do you think that this would actually be helpful for you? And if you do, then you can move on. But if you don't, put it down and look for other texts. this is another mistake a lot of students make, is that they say, well, I need 10 sources. I have to use every single one that I find. When in reality, if you're going to use a source that really isn't relevant to your work, you might end up trying to change some of the meaning of the original work, which you also don't want to do. So if it's not relevant, put it away. It's going to be much easier in the long run to find stuff that's relevant, that actually makes a difference with your work, versus using something just for the sake of it being easy and you don't have to find another work to replace it. So if the main idea seems relevant to your point, you move on to step 3 and ask, are there particular parts in the article that are relevant to your point? Do they have really interesting examples? Did they do an experiment where you want to cite the results? In which case, if there are, you'll move on to step 4. But if there aren't, and it's maybe just the general idea that you could use as an example of your greater point, then you would summarize the main idea in your own words. So this is the first option, is if it's the broad idea that you want to get across, but you really don't need a lot of their specific examples or specific ideas, then you would stop there and just summarize the paper. So if there are particular parts of the article that are relevant to your point, you're going to paraphrase those parts in your own words. First thing is to paraphrase. Don't jump to quoting right away. It's your paper. You really want to prioritize using your own words. However, moving on to step 5, are there any words that you can't paraphrase without sacrificing the essence of the idea? If there aren't, then you're good. Then you've got your summary, you've got your paraphrase, you're done. However, if there are words that you can't paraphrase without sacrificing the essence of the idea, then you put those words in quotes. Again, if the author says something in such an interesting or a unique way, and if you were to paraphrase that, you would get rid of the essence of what they're saying, it's perfectly fine to quote. I'm not trying to scare you away from quoting, but what I am trying to do is get you to quote selectively, and not to just quote everything you think is interesting, but to put a priority on, can I really paraphrase this in my own words? And if you can, do that as a first step. But if the author says something that's really interesting and you want to use their own words, then by all means do that. But definitely make it a part of a decision flow. Don't just go directly to quoting, but decide realistically and specifically which method will be best for what the information that you're trying to use. And once you're done, finally, read what you wrote again to make sure that you have illustrated the original source accurately. So in the process of summarizing and paraphrasing and quoting, have you maintained the original meaning? And if you have, good, you're done. But if not, this final step forces you to go back and say, wait, I did kind of leave something out here that's really important, in which case you want to go back and make that better. And in conclusion, we discussed integrating sources. So when you use external sources and you want to bring in outside evidence for your points, this requires that you borrow the information both appropriately and accurately. We discussed 3 ways of doing this. The first is summary, which again is of a shorter length, significantly shorter length than the original work, and uses your own words, different words than the original work. The second is paraphrase, which is of a similar or comparable length to the original work, and again uses your own words, not the author's original ones. And finally, quotation, which is the same length, the same words, and you would then quote in order to show how something was said, because how something was said is equally as significant as what was said. Okay? Talk to you soon.